The servants noticed it first, a door that was always open, suddenly sealed, no announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet order, and the king's daughter was never mentioned again. In a palace built on memory and ritual, forgetting someone was the harshest sentence imaginable. Stay, and you'll learn how King Xerxes erased a royal life without bloodshed, why silence became his most powerful weapon, and how empires learned to punish by removing meaning instead of life. If you enjoy this dark histories, leave a like and subscribe. My mum said I will not reach 1,000 subscribers. Let's prove her wrong. Comment below where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious to know where this story reach. Long before history remembered King Xerxes as a ruler of vast armies and towering ambition, there existed a quieter, more unsettling story buried beneath the weight of empire. A story that unfolded not on battlefields or marble halls filled with courtiers, but behind sealed doors where lineage mattered more than affection and blood ties were treated as tools rather than bonds. And in this world, the greatest danger to a dynasty was not rebellion from the outside, but disorder from within. Because Persian kings understood something most rulers feared to acknowledge, that the stability of an empire often depended on controlling not only provinces and generals, but family itself. And it was within this philosophy of absolute order that Xerxes made a decision so final, so methodical, that later generations would struggle to describe it, choosing words like erased, removed, and lost, because what happened left no public spectacle, no official decree, and no visible trace, only an absence that historians would later sense but rarely explain. And the daughter at the center of this story was not punished in the way enemies were punished, nor honored in the way royal children were expected to be honored. Instead, she was subjected to something far colder, far more enduring, a fate designed not to end a life, but to nullify it. And to understand why this was considered worse than death by those who lived close enough to witness it, one must first understand how identity functioned in the Persian royal court. Because identity was not personal, it was political. Every member of the royal household existed as a symbol of continuity, legitimacy, and divine favor. And when that continuity was threatened, even by rumor, the response was swift, precise, and irreversible. And Xerxes, raised within this system, believed deeply that disorder left unchecked could fracture an empire more effectively than any invading force. And so he ruled not only with authority, but with a relentless need for control, particularly over those closest to him, because proximity to power carried risk, and risk demanded management. And as whispers began circulating within the palace, not of rebellion or betrayal, but of deviation, uncertainty, and influence deemed unacceptable, the king faced a choice that no law explicitly described, yet tradition quietly endorsed, and the choice was not execution nor exile, but removal from relevance, a process so subtle that it appeared almost merciful on the surface, yet devastating in its permanence. And from that moment forward, the daughter ceased to exist as a figure within the public memory of the court. Her name gradually disappearing from records, her presence omitted from ceremonies, her future quietly reassigned to silence. And what made this fate particularly disturbing was its invisibility, because nothing outwardly dramatic occurred. No chains, no guards dragging her away, no cries echoing through halls. Instead, there was a calm transition, a reorganization, a quiet decision carried out with the same efficiency used to relocate officials or redraw provincial boundaries. And within days, the rhythms of court life adjusted, servants reassigned, rooms sealed, conversations redirected, and the absence normalized so quickly that those who noticed it felt unsure whether they were meant to remember her at all. And this uncertainty was precisely the point. Because in the Persian system, to be forgotten was to be neutralized, stripped of influence not only in the present but in the future. And while death created martyrs and memories, erasure created nothing. No story to tell, no warning to pass down, only silence. And it was this silence that unnerved those who remained, because it demonstrated the extent of the king's authority, not as a force of violence, but as a force of definition, able to decide who mattered and who no longer existed within the story of the empire. And for the daughter herself, whose life until that moment had been defined by ritual, expectation, and proximity to power, the sudden shift was disorienting beyond words, because she was not cast out into the world, nor confined in visible captivity, but placed into a state of permanent suspension, alive yet disconnected, present yet unacknowledged, surrounded by walls that did not confine the body but erased the role. And in the ancient world, where identity was inseparable from public recognition, This was a profound punishment, because a person without recognition had no future, no lineage, no legacy, and no voice. And while later historians would debate the details, argue over motivations, and question the morality of such an act, those who lived within the court understood exactly what it meant, that the king had chosen the most absolute form of control available to him, one that did not end a life, but removed it from meaning. And as time passed and Xerxes continued his reign, the empire expanded, campaigns were launched, monuments erected, and victories recorded, yet the absence remained. A quiet void within the royal household that no one dared reference directly, because to speak of it was to acknowledge that even royal blood offered no protection from the logic of power. And in this unspoken understanding lay the true horror of the decision, not because it was cruel in a theatrical sense, but because it revealed a system where existence itself was conditional, granted and withdrawn at the discretion of a ruler who believed order justified all costs. And as the years moved forward, the daughter's fate became something far more unsettling than a single act. It became a precedent, a demonstration that the most terrifying authority is not the power to kill, but the power to decide who is remembered, who is erased, and who is allowed to remain part of history at all. And this realization would haunt the Persian court long after the decision itself faded into silence, setting the stage for a deeper understanding of why contemporaries later whispered that what Xerxes did was not an act of rage or passion, but something far colder, far more deliberate, and far more frightening than death. As the court adjusted to the absence, the machinery of empire continued with an efficiency that made the decision feel irreversible, because Persian power was built not on hesitation but on momentum. And once momentum shifted, it carried everything with it, including memory. And those who served within the palace learned quickly that survival depended on aligning oneself with the new version of reality, where questions were unnecessary and recollection was dangerous. And so routines resumed, ceremonies continued, and the public image of their royal household remained perfectly intact, while privately a subtle tension settled into the corridors. A shared awareness that the rules governing existence had become clearer and harsher, because if a royal daughter could be quietly removed from relevance, then no position was truly secure, and this awareness reshaped behavior in ways that were difficult to detect but impossible to ignore. For voices lowered, glances lingered, and loyalty became performative rather than instinctive, as individuals learned to demonstrate alignment through silence rather than speech. And the king, perceptive to shifts in atmosphere, interpreted this compliance as confirmation that order had been restored, reinforcing his belief that decisive control prevented instability. And yet beneath this surface calm, the psychological cost of erasure began to ripple outward, affecting not only the one erased, but those who remained. Because human memory resists command, and what cannot be spoken often grows heavier in the mind, and servants who once interacted daily with the daughter found themselves unconsciously pausing at sealed doors. Courtiers avoided certain pathways through the palace, and even the architecture seemed altered by absence. Rooms that had once carried laughter now absorbed sound differently, as if the walls themselves recognized the subtraction. And for the daughter, whose name would later vanish from formal accounts, the experience was defined by a profound dislocation, because she was not sent away to a distant province where a new identity might form, nor confined in a visible manner that allowed suffering to be named. Instead, she remained within reach of the world she had known, yet permanently excluded from it, existing in a space where time continued but meaning did not. And this condition created a unique form of isolation, because isolation is most severe when one is close enough to observe normal life without being allowed to participate, and within this suspended existence, the markers that once structured her days dissolved. No public acknowledgement, no ceremonial role, no future expectation. Only the quiet repetition of days without recognition, and in a society where status defined purpose. This was a profound stripping of self, because without a role, identity itself began to blur, and ancient observers understood this intuitively, describing such conditions as a living unmaking rather than a punishment, because it removed not only opportunity but orientation, leaving the individual untethered within a system that no longer acknowledged their presence. And this unmaking served a larger political function, because it demonstrated to the court that order was maintained not through spectacle, but through certainty. The certainty that deviation would be met not with chaos, but with disappearance. And as Xerxes continued to govern, issuing decrees and commanding campaigns, the absence faded from daily consciousness yet remained embedded in the court's collective understanding, shaping behavior long after the moment itself had passed. And this is why later chroniclers struggled to capture the event accurately, because it left no dramatic trace, only a pattern, a noticeable gap where something once existed. And patterns are harder to document than actions, especially when those patterns are designed to discourage observation. And over time, the daughter's story transformed into something almost abstract, a cautionary presence felt, rather than described, influencing decisions in subtle ways, reminding those closest to power that alignment mattered more than blood, and that proximity offered no immunity from the logic of empire. And this logic extended beyond the palace, because Persian governance relied on the principle that stability was achieved through predictability, and predictability required the elimination of uncertainty wherever it arose, even within the family itself. And in choosing erasure over execution or exile, Xerxes selected a method that minimized disruption while maximizing control. Because it avoided public reaction and prevented the creation of sympathy or resistance. And this calculated restraint is what made the act so unsettling to later generations, because it revealed a form of authority that did not need cruelty to assert itself, only administration, patience, and time. And for those living under such a system, time became the greatest enforcer, because with each passing year, the memory weakened, references disappeared, and eventually the absence became normalized, until new generations grew up unaware that anything had ever been missing at all. And this normalization was the final stage of erasure, the point at which silence completed its work, and yet traces lingered in unexpected places, in altered routines, in sealed chambers, in stories whispered cautiously among those old enough to remember a different arrangement of the household. And these traces carried a lesson that transcended the specific event, illustrating how power can reshape reality not through force but through omission, and why some fates were feared more than death itself, because death ended presence, while erasure denied significance, and significance was the currency of ancient life, determining whether one's existence mattered. Within the larger story of the world, and as Xerxes' reign moved forward, this lesson became embedded in the structure of the court, shaping relationships, reinforcing obedience, and defining the boundaries of acceptable identity. And in doing so, it revealed the true cost of absolute order, not measured in lives lost, but in lives rendered invisible. And this invisibility, once achieved, proved far more enduring than any punishment that history could easily record, ensuring that the daughter's fate would survive not as a documented event, but as an absence felt by those who understood what had been removed and why. And as the empire continued to write its victories and monuments into history, this quiet story remained buried beneath them, a reminder that the most effective forms of control are often the least visible, and that the power to erase can be far more frightening than the power to destroy, because destruction leaves evidence, while erasure leaves only silence, and silence once accepted reshapes the world without ever announcing itself.